Hey guys, I'm Mark with the Oval RC, and you're watching Mud Boss setup video number 2. Some of you guys will watch this video and you'll skip right over it. You won't even do this process, and this is a really important process to building a car. Every little thing you do to the race car helps. It's not just one thing. I really don't do anything with my motor. I spend all my time on the car, freeing it up, making it handle better, and that's how you get a fast race car. So in the first video, we removed the Traxxas Slash out of the box. We put the parts on the chassis needed to run in the Mud Boss class. We added a Mud Boss body. But I really didn't talk too much about setup, and that's because we're still prepping the car. So in this video here, I'm going to show you how to remove some of the drag that's caused by the bearing seals. Now we're going to remove all 4 tires, and we're going to take all the bearings out of the spindles. Now we can use our lug wrench and remove the wheels. Before we remove the bearings in this car here, and we try to get the bearings to spin a little bit freer, I'm going to show you a little bit of a comparison. This is the brand new car, and this is the Mud Boss that I currently race. This one is already race prepped. So I'll spin the tire on this car first, spin the tire on this one here, and we'll see which one spins longer. And you can see the tire on the brand new Slash has already stopped. The tire on the race prepped car is still spinning. So let's continue and we'll finish removing the wheels. Behind each wheel is a wheel spacer. You have gray ones up front and black ones at the back. To remove the wheel spacer, take a flathead screwdriver, carefully get behind the spacer, pry it just a little bit, and the spacer will pop right off. And behind the spacer is a tiny steel pin. Remove the pin. Here's a closer look at the spacer. You can see it has a slot in it, and that's where the pin snaps right into place. The flat part of the spacer faces the wheel. The back spacers will come off the same way as the front spacers. Be careful removing each spacer that you don't lose this little steel pin. This will go right through the hole in the axle, and when you remove the spacer, sometimes this will fall out. Now you can remove the front axle. Be careful when you do, because behind that steel pin is a tiny washer. And you can push the axle right through the bearings. Do the same thing on the other side. On the rear axle, just remove the washer right now on each side. Using a hex driver tool, carefully push the bearing out of each side of the spindle. Set the bearings aside and do the same for the other side. After you had the 4 bearings removed from the front of the car, we'll modify these first, get them back on the car, and then we'll move to the back of the car. Each bearing has a rubber seal on each side, and this rubber seal rides right up against the metal part of the bearing on the inside that spins, and this side here sits down inside the bearing. It creates a cover to keep water, dirt, or mud out. It's great if you're bashing or running through the water or puddles and stuff like that, but if you're racing, this is a lot of drag on the car. So you're looking at 8 seals up front, 8 on the back, plus what's inside the transmission. That's a lot of drag on the car. So I'm going to show you what I do to modify this rubber seal. You want to take an X-Acto knife and be very careful and get underneath the edge right here. And you can lift this seal right off the bearing. Just like that. Now we'll do the same for the other side of the bearing. Just lift it right up like that. And lift it off the bearing. By first looking at it, it looks like it's just a rubber ring. And if we flip it over, you can see that the seal is made of metal, covered by rubber. It has a lip on the inside and a sealing lip on the outside. We're going to cut this rubber lip off this seal. The easiest way I found to do this is just take the X-Acto knife and go right along like this. That's what it'll look like after you have the ring cut out of the center. And after the rubber is cut out of the inside of the seal, you can see a little bit of metal from that metal ring. So something I wanted to show you guys, but if you look really closely here, this bearing just came out of a brand new car. We just pulled it out of the box. I just pulled the seals off, and there is no grease inside this bearing. No type of lubricant whatsoever. So that rubber seal is going to be getting warm right up against this bearing here, and it's going to create a lot of drag. Now, it wouldn't be so bad if you're talking maybe 1 seal on each side, but we're talking 16 seals, and that's just on the wheels. That doesn't include the transmission. So this is going to be a lot of drag that you're freeing up on the car. On a small track that has a lot of wrecks, that you need a lot of luck, maybe this isn't a big deal. But if you're up at full throttle speedway where there's not a lot of wrecks and you need a lot of speed, this is something that could really help you out and pick up that extra tenth that you're looking for. So now we're going to go ahead and put the seal cover back on the bearing after we put a little bit of oil inside the bearing. I'm using the Brad Penn utility oil. I also like using a light oil with Moly lube inside it. I don't like using grease. It's easier to spin oil than it is to spin grease. So I'll put some oil inside the bearing since this had no lubrication whatsoever. We'll fill it up on the other side too. Now you're not going to be able to keep the oil inside there. It's just important that you get it lubricated. And then we'll stick the seal back onto the bearing. Just press it lightly back down into place. You can see with the seal cover in place that the seal is no longer touching the bearing. We'll add just a little bit more oil to the bearing before we seal it back up. Slide the seal back over the bearing. Press it down into place. And you want to do the same thing to the other 3 front bearings and the other 4 rear bearings. Now you have 1 free spinning bearing, and you can always squirt oil right alongside the seal and the bearing to get lubrication inside the bearing when you're at the racetrack. So now I'm ready to put the bearings back in the front end. We'll slide the bearing over the front axle and slide the axle through the spindle from the inside. Now hold the back side of the axle, slide the bearing over the shaft, make sure everything's pressed firmly down into place. While holding the axle into place, slide the washer over the axle. Then you're going to install the steel pin through the axle. Then you're going to slide the wheel spacer over the axle and snap it into place till you hear it snap. And we'll do the same thing for the other side. And we have our low drag setup on the front end all done. Now we'll do a simple test to see if we made an improvement. They both seem to be spinning along just fine. They both seem to be slowing down at about the same time. Looks like they're just about equal. Our new bearing setup's going to work out just great. And now we're going to do the same thing for both the rear bearings. We're going to use our 2.5 millimeter hex driver. We're going to remove the rear spindle. Going to remove this pin. After you unscrew the pin, you can pull it right out. Next, you will need to use your 2 millimeter hex driver and remove the bolt that goes in the top part of the spindle on the radius rod. Remove that bolt. Now we can slide our right rear drive shaft off and slide the spindle off of the rear axle. Be careful not to lose the washer that's behind the spindle. Using your hex driver, carefully push the bearing out of the spindle. And now we need to do the same thing to the two rear bearings. We have our bearing seals all trimmed down, we have our bearings all oiled up, and ready to put them back into place. Press them down into the spindle. You'll take the right rear axle. First slide the washer over the axle, then slide the spindle over the axle. Slide the axle into place. The pin will go through the lower hole in the spindle. Tighten the pin down snug. Next, we'll attach the tie rod to the spindle. We'll slide the washer over the rear axle. We'll insert the pin through the axle and snap the wheel spacer over the pin. Now we'll do the same thing on the other side. We have our bearings all done. Now we can insert them into the spindle. So I hope this video helped you out, finding that little bit of speed you were looking for. In the next video, we're going to be taking apart the transmission, prepping that, getting that ready to race. In the meantime, you can join my Facebook group. That's the Oval RC. Please subscribe to my channel. Don't forget to hit the bell, and we'll see you on the next one.